On this day, June 6, 1944, some of the bravest men who has ever lived was about to make history, and many of them would not live to see it. But if ever you doubted which was the greatest generation, you should look into the events and actions on all sides of the D-Day landings and battles. At 1 a.m. on June 6th, the airborne operations begin. The British, Canadian, and American airborne units, they drop about 24,000 paratroopers and glider troops from the British 6th Airborne Division, 8,500 men including the 1st Canadian Parachute Battalion, and the 82nd and 101st U.S. Airborne Divisions, which drops 15,500 men, all drop behind German lines. The British 6th Airborne, they land east of the Owen River to secure the bridges, Pegasus and Horsa Bridge, and thereby getting access to the Melville Battery, which is overlooking Sword Beach. 0016 a.m., Major John Howard's company of 180 men captured Pegasus Bridge in a swift glider assault. He lost 2 men killed and 14 wounded. The 82nd and 101st Airborne, their targets include securing the causeway from Utah Beach, capturing Sainte-Mère-Anglaise, and disrupting the German communications. Their drops, however, are scattered due to low cloud cover, anti-aircraft fire. Exact figures at this hour is unavailable, but the airborne units, they suffer early losses, an estimated 100 to 200 men killed in the first hour. Both forces due to crashes and drownings in flooded area and initial skirmishes with the Germans. One interesting anecdote from this time is the paratrooper John Steele from the 82nd, he lands on the Sainte-Mère-Anglaise church steeple, where he hangs for hours, pretending to be dead, in order to avoid Germans firing at him. That later becomes an interesting symbol of how chaotic the drop went. As the airborne drops occur and rally their forces, of course the Germans now detect that paratrooper activity is going on, but they're not organized themselves. They have the 91st Infantry Division with almost 7,000 men and the 709th Static Division with almost 10,000 men. However, these are not the best. Some of them are older, convalescents, or Easttruppen. However, 17,000 Germans on the Corentin Peninsula are now alerted. Also remember, dummies were dropped as diversions. Now, the reports of paratroopers does cause confusions amongst the Germans. Some commanders dismiss them as sabotage. General Wilhelm Felle of the 91st Infantry Division is killed by U.S. paratroopers while traveling, disrupting German command. Local patrols engage scattered paratroopers, but no major counterattack form yet. In the first hour of the invasion of the 17,000 German troops, 1,000 to 2,000 of them are now engaged in initial skirmishing with the airborne. In this first hour, they lose around 100 killed in action. After the war, a German soldier from Sainte-Mère-Anglaise, he remembers being woken up by church bells and fires from the bombing. Initially, they mistake the paratroopers for local resistance incidents, delaying their response. Remember the 1,000 acts of sabotage all around Normandy by the French resistance as well. Between 1 and 3 a.m., the U.S. paratroopers secure their key objectives, despite them still being scattered. The 101st captures Sainte-Mère-Anglaise by 2 a.m., establishing a critical foothold. The British 6th Airborne consolidates their positions around the Pegasus Bridge and engages the Melville Battery. 505th Parachute Infantry Regiment from the 101st Airborne, they overcome the resistance at Sainte-Mère-Anglaise, with 200 Germans are defending and securing the town, but had to retreat or give up. At the Melville Battery, the 9th Parachute Battalion from the 6th Airborne attack the fortified German position of 130 strong. They neutralized the guns, which are threatening Sword Beach, but the airborne suffers almost 50% casualties. 75 out of 150 men are lost. By 3 a.m., it is estimated that between 500 to 700 of the airborne have been killed across all operations, both to misdrops, flooding, glider crashes, and the fighting. Across that part of Normandy, U.S. paratroopers are using their toy cricket clickers to identify themselves in the dark. One soldier, Private David Webster from the 101st, later recalls that clicking his way frantically through the neighborhood to avoid friendly fire, highlighting the chaos of the scattered drops. The German units are mobilized to counter the airborne landings. The 91st Infantry Division and the 709th Static engages in small-scale firefights, while the 716th Static Division of 7,000 men east of the Orne reports paratrooper activity there as well. German commanders, including General Max from the 84th Corps, struggle to assess the invasion scale. The 21st Panzer Division of 12,000 men with 127 Panzer IVs near Caen, they are alerted, but they're not deployed. Communication breakdowns and absence of commanders. Rommel is in Germany. This hinders response. By 3 a.m., around 5,000 of the Germans are now engaged in patrols or defensive positions. Their casualties are estimated to be around 200 to 400 killed at this point, primarily for the 709th and 91st from skirmishing. A German officer from the 709th Division, upon capturing a U.S. paratrooper, is baffled by his insistence that thousands more are landing, reflecting the Germans' disbelief in the actual invasion scope, still expecting it to be in Calais. Between 3 and 5 a.m., the naval and air bombardment begins. The Allied naval and air forces now initiate their pre-invasion bombardment. Over 2,200 bombers from the U.S. 8th Air Force and the RAF, and 1,200 Navy vessels, battleships, cruisers, destroyers, now target German coastal defenses. The bombers drop thousands of tons of ordnance on the Atlantic Wall. However, cloud cover reduces accuracy, especially around Omaha Beach, where naval gunfire from ships like the USS Texas and HMS Warspite targets bunkers and gun emplacements. It is later determined that a lot of the Allied aircraft dropped their bombs too late to hit many of the German positions, out of fear of hitting their own ships. The air forces fly 14,000 sorties. They lose 127 aircraft. There are no troops landed yet, but the bombardment is preparing for the beach landings. There's minimal Allied casualties, about 100 aircrew killed. However, between 20 to 27,000 Frenchmen are killed in the attack on Normandy. The German coastal batteries of the 352nd and 716th Divisions now detect the Allied armada and brace for attack. Fortifications, including 6.5 million mines, bunkers, absorb much of the bombardment, however. The 352nd Infantry Division has 12,000 men, veterans. The 716th Static Division, about 7,000, less highly trained, but still, they man the coastal defenses. Key batteries like Pointe du Hoc has 200 men with 155mm guns. Long-sur-Mer, 184 men, 150mm guns. They all prepare to fight. A few Luftwaffe sorties are flown, but out of the 850 aircraft they have available, they are minimal due to the Allied air superiority and lack of fuel. It is estimated that from the aerial and naval bombardment, 300 to 500 German soldiers are killed. At Crisbeck Battery, they respond to the D-Day invasion starting at 5 a.m., when Ornison sights the Allied fleet, triggering the alert. At 5:55 a.m., it fires at them with two 10mm guns, opening fire on the ships off Utah Beach. He sinks the USS Corey by 6:40 and is now engaged with USS Tuscaloosa, USS Quincy, USS Nevada, USS Texas, and USS Arkansas, as if he couldn't get enough. Anti-aircraft guns down Allied aircraft and repel a paratrooper attack as well by 1 to 3 a.m. They even managed to capture several U.S. soldiers. By 8 a.m., one of the two 10mm guns was destroyed. Then another was damaged by 9 a.m., reducing the battery's artillery fire, although the anti-aircraft and machine gun defenses remained active way into the evening. The battery's garrison, about 400 men, used 3 210 Skoda guns, 675 and 3 20mm anti-aircraft guns, 1 150mm cannon, and 70 machine guns. And despite the 598 tons of bombs dropped on them overnight by plane and navy, its casemates still ensured they survived. Casualties were only 50 to 100 men. The batteries disrupted the Utah beach operations, but was partially silenced by evening. One of the 210 guns were operational still. The battery holds out until June 12th, and most of the garrison gets away. One of the lone gunners at Long-sur-Mer, he recalls after the fighting, the ground was shaking from naval shells, the concrete bunkers were holding together, but the crews were stunned inside by the intensity, and yet they were still expecting Calais to be the main landing point. Imagine the thought process. A battleship is hammering at your bunker, and your thoughts are, oh well, I'm only the diversion. I wonder how bad it's going to go when the real innovation comes. Wow. Despite that, Long-sur-Mer battery responded aggressively to the invasion. They opened fire at 5:30 to 5:37 a.m. on the Allied ships off Gold Beach, notably HMS Bululu, and landing crafts firing between 115 and 180 rounds. They disrupted the landings in Gold Beach, but had a limited impact on Omaha due to the range. By 8:35-9 a.m., naval bombardment from HMS Ajax and FFL George Laguerre disabled 3 of its 450mm guns, effectively silencing the battery's artillery by mid-morning. Anti-aircraft and machine gun defenses continued into the evening, but the battery was no longer an offensive threat. No ground assault occurred on June 6th. British forces captured it on June 7th with minimal resistance. They had a garrison of 184 men from the Kriegsmarine and from the 357th and 716th Division, and yet they suffered less than 40 killed and wounded. And the casemates held up quite well, except when the guns were actually hit. You'll see when I take you there next week. By now, 5:30 to 6:30, the men were in the landing crafts, and the first beach landings begin. At 6:30, the amphibious landings across 5 beaches. By noon, 156,000 troops had landed, 73,000 from the U.S., 83,000 British Canadian, plus 2,000 others from other nations. Initially, the U.S. 4th Infantry Division lands 23,250 men on Utah Beach. They land with minimal resistance due to a navigational error, actually placing them in a less fortified sector, where they still engage the 709th Static Division. On Omaha Beach, U.S. 1st and 29th Infantry Division lands 34,250 men. They face intense resistance from the veteran 352nd Infantry Division. The high cliffs and the bunkers cause heavy casualties. On Gold Beach, the 50th British Division lands 24,970 men, and they face the 716th Static Division. They capture Almash by evening. On Juno Beach, the Canadian 3rd Division lands 21,400 men, and they encounter the 716th Static Division. They advance to Rivieres. On Sword Beach, the British 3rd Division land 28,845 men. They face the 716th Static as well, and elements of the 21st Panzer Division. They still manage to link up with the 6th Airborne. By 8 a.m., 75,000 troops have landed in the first wave. By that time, also 3,000 have been killed, and about 5,000 to 7,000 wounded or missing. Omaha alone sees over 1,000 men killed. At this point, it is estimated that between 30,000 and 40,000 German soldiers are engaged in the actual fighting, with around 2,000 killed so far, primarily from the 352nd and 716th Division. At the Macy Battery, the garrison is alerted by the reports of the airborne landings, and after midnight they prepare for action. The Flak Battalion, here equipped with 88s, 20mm and 37mm anti-aircraft guns, they engage Allied aircraft. Colonel Kistowski later reported to the historian Cornelius Ryan that his unit shot down several planes and captured at least 12 U.S. paratroopers at Macy on June 6th. That indicate active anti-aircraft operations from early morning. They also had artillery, 155 and 100mm howitzers. They remained silent during this phase to conserve ammunition for more clearer awaiting targets that are sure to unfold as the invasion came closer. The battery's secrecy and inland position, about 1 mile from the coast, made it very difficult for the Allied intelligence to pinpoint, and its trenches and bunkers absorbed much of the bombardment. No significant ground engagement occurs at Macy during this period, as Allied airborne troops were scattered and focused on objectives closer to Utah Beach, such as Saint-Mère-Église. German anti-aircraft gunners at Macy under Kistowski's command operated in near darkness. They were guided by radar and the mere sound of Allied aircraft, creating a very tense atmosphere as they were firing into the night sky, uncertain of the scale of this invasion. From 6:30 to noon, the Allies establish a beachhead. They've landed around 120,000 troops by noon, and they slowly begin to inch their way inland. The 4th Infantry Division links with the 101st Airborne, advancing 4 to 6 miles inland, capturing exits to Canton, with 179 killed and about 500 wounded. At Omaha Beach, the 1st and 29th Division break through at noon, finally, losing more than 1,000 men and 1,400 wounded. The U.S. Army Rangers, specifically the 2nd Ranger Battalion, they land at Pointe du Hoc at 6:30 a.m. Part of the invasion, but their assault is vertical. First, they land their landing crafts on the base of the cliffs under heavy German fire from the 352nd Infantry. The Rangers, led by Colonel James Rudder, scale the 100-foot cliffs using ropes and ladders. They had to get up and neutralize the German 155mm guns, which they later found to have been moved inland. The Rangers will spend the next 3 days fighting to hold Pointe du Hoc until relieved. On Gold Beach, the 5th Division captures Aumarche. They already now begin to set up for the Mulberry Harbors. They have 400 killed and 1,600 wounded or missing. On Juno, the 3rd Canadian Division reaches Rivières 7 miles inland with 340 killed and 574 wounded. On Sword Beach, the 3rd Division linked up with the 6th Airborne, but they stall short of Caen due to the 21st Panzer's counterattack, 600 killed and 1,400 wounded or missing. At this time, they have 120,000 landed, with 45,000 additional since the first wave. 3,000 to 4,000 killed, 7,000 to 9,000 wounded or missing. Omaha accounts for more than 2,000 casualties at this point. General Norman Cota on Omaha. He rallies his troops. Man with a cane walking up and down the beach. He says, "We are going to die on the beaches or in the fields, but not here." He inspires his troops to break up past the shingle. If I ever want to do a war movie about a man, he's got to be it. The German defenses weaken under the heavy Allied pressure. The 21st Panzer Division, they launch a counterattack towards Sword Beach, but they are halted by air and naval fire, just like Rommel predicted. On Utah Beach, the 709th Static Division retreats and partially surrenders with 1,000 men captured. On Omaha, the 352nd Infantry Division, they exhaust their reserves, but they hold on until noon, then withdraw inland in good order. On Gold, Juno, Sword, the 716th Static Division, they crumble. That day, when the 21st Panzer Division is finally released with its 12,000 men and 127 tanks, as they engage Sword, they lose 50 tanks to airstrikes and anti-tank guns. One of the 21st Panzer Division's tank commanders radios in as he's witnessing Allied gliders overhead. He radios, "It's like a swarm of locusts out here," and he's still unaware of the full scale of the invasion. By evening on D-Day, 160,000 troops are ashore. They established a beachhead on average 6 to 10 miles deep, except for at Omaha, only 2 miles. On Utah, the 4th Division secures Canton approaches, with the 101st Airborne holding Saint-Mère-Église, with 300 killed in total. On Omaha Beach, the 1st and 29th Divisions, they advance inland, capturing Colville-de-Saumur. Total casualties, 2,400, with 1,000 killed and 1,400 wounded or missing. On Gold, 50th Division secures Bayeux's outskirts. They now begin to prepare for the Mulberry Harbors to set up. Imagine the logistics. You have this enormous invasion fleet that has just landed. They're still fighting their way inland. And the road work, the fuel lines, the artificial harbors are already on their way to be set up. That is logistic amazement. Juno, the 3rd Canadian, holds 7 Mile front, linking it with Gold. About 500 killed and 800 wounded are missing. On Sword, the 3rd Division repels the 21st Panzer's counterattack, but they fail to take Caen. Casualties about 800 killed and 1,800 wounded are missing. On Sword Beach, Piper, Bill Millen. He's the piper from the Lord Lovett's 1st Special Service Brigade. He walks up and down the beach playing the Highlander Luddy amidst the gunfire and explosions that boost the morale of his troops, and confused, the Germans, they do not shoot at him. The German forces retreat to defensive lines. The 352nd and the 716th Divisions are depleted, and the 21st Panzer fails to break the Allied lines. On Utah, the 709th has collapsed with 2,000 men captured. On Omaha, the 352nd withdraws, losing 2,000 men. On Gold, Juno Sword, 716th is nearly destroyed. 21st Panzer Division loses 50% of its tanks. They retreat towards Caen. Luftwaffe and Kriegsmarine efforts are inefficient. Before ordering a retreat, General Marx inspects Omaha's defenses. He is stunned by the Allied onslaught, and he said, "If we don't stop them here, we lose France." And then he ordered the retreat. Many of the initial reports of landings was dismissed as diversions, even all the way up to headquarters and command level. Rundstedt would order the Panzer Reserves at 4 a.m. to move, but Hitler delayed approval until noon, as he himself was not certain of being a diversion in Normandy. This hampered the response. Dolman scrambled to reinforce the beaches. The Luftwaffe only managed to fly 319 sorties. This was inefficient against the Allied air superiority. Kriegsmarine U-boats and E-boats engaged lightly but were repelled. The rest of the story of Normandy you have heard or will hear, and I will show you where these battles took place. However, let's just settle one thing once and for all. The myth that Hitler was sleeping through D-Day and everyone afraid to wake him, that was a myth. Now, the deception campaign had exceeded what the Allies could ever have hoped for, certainly. And the signal to the French resistance had been picked up by German intelligence. They knew what it meant, but not where or exactly when. General Hans von Salzmutz from the 15th Army at Calais had been awoken by his chief of staff, who told him there were lots of ships and crafts on the coast, but none had landed by 0600, which indeed they had not at Calais, so he judged the invasion having already failed, and he went back to sleep. However, at the Berghof, as the first reports of heavy landings in Normandy, Hitler had indeed been awoken. But the reports were not conclusive, still seen as possible diversions from Calais. By 0800 in the morning, Hitler was in the Great Hall with Keitel, Jodl, Otto Günsche was present, as was Seitzler and Schmutz. After the war, one of his aides quoted Hitler at the time of having said, quote, "The news could not be better." To Keitel he said, "As long as they were in Britain, we could not get to them. Now we have them where we can destroy them." End quote. To Göring he said that day, "They have landed here, and just where we expected them." End quote. Hitler's mood was initially optimistic, and given the information he had received on his forces, they were positive. Even Göring was initially optimistic despite the Luftwaffe's tame response, expecting and quoting the full brunt of the German forces' counterattack, land and air, would be on the 3rd day. And as we all know, that was not to be. But Hitler was not sleeping. He was up and trying to gain an overview through flawed intelligence and infiltrated claims of his own forces' capabilities. 3 days later, by the time it was clear this was actually it was too late. Now, what happened on D-Day? That is covered extensively. And over the next couple of weeks, I will instead take you through 6 of the German strongpoints, how they were designed, built, how they fared on and after D-Day. So enjoy, please subscribe, and see you on the beaches. Well, actually, a little bit further inland, but never mind, you get where this is going. Toodles! I hope you'll consider subscribing to my channel, liking, follows, and maybe even join me on Patreon to help out. I am just a guy, a historian, traveling around all these historic places in Europe on my own dime, trying to bring them to you.